What's up, married men of the round table? It's James coming to you live from my office. I'm flying solo this week for the very first Married Men of the Round Table Fantasy Football podcast. I'm hoping to be able to incorporate Justin or some of you guys in here next couple of weeks, but I thought we'd try the first run on my own since Justin is apparently in Tahoe. So here we go. We're going to run through some of the recaps of last week's games. We're going to talk about some of the transactions that happened this week. We're going to go over some predictions and previews of next week's games. We'll see. The idea is to have some fun and just go over some stuff we can't do since we don't see each other very much. So maybe take us through last week's games real quick. Just spend a few minutes on each one. We'll start with Rob versus Justin. Justin eked out a win, 91-82. They were both winless coming in, I think, and it was the closest game of the week. As we looked at the box score here, Rob's running back core was just decimated by injury. And if you think back to the draft, he went high risk, high reward with LT and Westbrook, and it's not paying off. So if you look at the roster from last week when he played Justin, he was starting the inimitable Michael Bush and Carell Buckhalter as two of his starting running backs. Ouch. Although if you look at Justin's roster for that game, he turned over basically the whole thing coming in. And I guess if you look at this one, it paid off for him because that Steve Smith that he picked up, the other Steve Smith of the Giants, went for a respectable at least 12 points. So good enough for the win. If you look at Rob's high score was the surprising Santana Moss with a whopping 30 points. And Justin had to rely on 21 points from Big Ben and a fairly solid 12-point effort from the Giants' D. Justin clearly now a big Giants fan with Jacobs, Manningham, Smith, and the Giant D on his roster and starting almost every week. Maybe he needs to talk to Nate about a deal for Eli Manning, who I think is just buried on Nate's bench right now. Although Justin's Giants aren't going to be playing the woeful Tampa Bay Buccaneers every week, so may want to go easy on those Giants, Justin. One feature we're going to do for each game is a recap. We'll do the good call of the week and the bad call of the week. Good call of the week this time goes to Rob with his call of Santana Moss over Devin Hester and Brandon Marshall. Both of them had decent games, and maybe I would have started over Santana Moss, but those guys couldn't have touched Moss's 30-point effort this week. So good call on that one, Rob. For the bad call of the week, Justin, with the Mario Manningham love, only 5 points for Manningham, starting him over Pierre Garçon, everyone's favorite waiter and indie receiver who actually went for 18 points in his second touchdown in as many weeks. Tough call between Manningham and Garçon because they're basically the same guy, and I'm guessing here Justin was just blinded by his mad man love for all things Giant this week going with Manningham, but maybe think that over next week. Second game. Little recap, Nate versus Steve. Another fairly close game. Nate pulled this one out, actually, 84-77. Now, Nate was winless going in, and if you look back at the message boards, he was already sandbagging in Week 3 in an alleged effort to secure the top draft pick in 2010's fantasy football draft. Now, first of all, Nate, why don't you check in with Rob on how that number 1 pick is working out for him this year? Also, you don't start sandbagging in Week 3, all right? Give it a little time. As you see. After a little league manner intervention, we got Nate to start some of his top guys, and look, hey, it worked out for you, Nate. This is another close game. Steve was essentially done in by the two things here. First, Frank Gore hurt his ankle on the first play from scrimmage, and second, it was the city of Seattle. No, folks, I'm not talking about the Seahawks and their neon green Arena League jerseys. I'm talking about Steve's vacation in the Northwest, which caused him to forget to adjust his rosters for injuries and resulted in 2 starting wideouts that didn't play. Sorry, Steve. Welker and Bo probably aren't the best starters anyway, so I'm not sure how much you lost there, but getting goose eggs from both certainly didn't help you here. Now, Nate did get a solid performance from Phil Rivers, the disgruntled Anquan Bolden, and fantasy sleeper darling LaShawn McCoy. Nate could have benefited from a 45-point night from Peyton Manning too, by the way, but Justin, who's a Charger homer, set up Nate's roster this week, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But look at Nate's team for this week. Nate was led by another strong week from Matt Shaw, who's overcome a very shaky Week 1 to bounce back very strong in Weeks 2 and 3. So good call on that. Speaking of good calls, for the good call of the week in this game, Justin gets one of the good call awards here with Tony Gonzalez over Todd Yoder. But Gonzalez only had 1 point, you might ask. Yeah, that's true, but that's 1 more point than freaking Todd Yoder had or ever will have. Enough with the sandbagging, Nate. Get rid of the Yoders. We'll get to that soon, too. For the bad call of the week in this game, sorry, got to go to Steve. you started two guys who didn't even play. Now, since you have that vacation excuse, runner-up for this award is Justin, who wins based on the Rivers with 18 points over Peyton Manning, 45 points call. Hey, Nate, why don't you unload one of those QBs for a legit starting receiver, huh? Third game of the week, Matt versus Mike. Mike with a fairly convincing victory here, 113-96. Mike was unbeaten coming into this one. Matt did give him a little bit of a scare. Matt rode his first-round surprise, Maurice Jones-Drew, and that guy's 38 fantasy points to a victory here, overcoming the Bear QB that I will not name in this podcast and his 25-point outing, as well as another mediocre effort by projected fantasy stud Steve Slayton, who had 10 points last week and a total of only 17 over the first 3 weeks total. Slayton not living up to that billing. Mike also got some pretty good numbers here from Reggie Wayne, who had 20 points. The Packer D came through okay with 14, and those things offset a meager 4-point day from fantasy juggernaut Drew Brees. Now, it's a surprising week for Brees and his 4 points against what we thought was a pretty shaky Bills secondary. I wonder how that bodes for his upcoming matchup against that swarming Jets defense this week, led by their stud corner Darrelle Revis. Another game note here is that if you look at the score and the box score, Mike's bench outscored not only his starters, but most of the other teams in the league this week. Nice call with the bench. So looking at Mike's roster here, he's got some serious depth, and with an undefeated record so far, looking like he might be the team to beat here. Good call of the week in this game. I actually give it to Matt for starting Noshawn Marino with his 15 points over the Jets' Thomas Jones, who only had 2. Ballsy call. I think most of the experts were looking at Thomas Jones to have a good week here, and Noshawn was a non-known entity, but you made the right call there. Good stuff. Bad call of the week. I had a tough one choosing this. Matt was hurt by going with Tim Hightower over Willie Parker. Hightower had 3 points. Parker had 18. But it's hard to argue with the logic there. I mean, Hightower was getting a ton of receptions and most of the carries there, and Parker was nicked up. But didn't work out for you, Matt. Sorry. Mike did also end up with a net loss of 23 points by going with Drew Brees over Joe Flacco. But again, who doesn't make that call? I mean, you got to be starting Brees every week. So those are bad calls, and you get the awards, guys. But still, who can fault you? Game number 4, Gabe versus me. I was able to pull this out 82-65 in just the yawner of the week. I mean, this game was not fun to monitor. It wasn't even fun to be a part of. Both of our teams pretty much underachieved, and there wasn't even very much drama as I pretty much crawled out to an early lead and then just kind of clung on to it through Monday night as Tony Romo sucked just a little less than D'Angelo Williams did. My team was led by late-round gem Donald Driver, who thus far has solidly outperformed my 2 top stud picks, the Johnson brothers. Yeah, Andre and Calvin Johnson have not delivered so far for me on that preseason hype, and if they don't get going, I'm really worried about my chances down the stretch. I went with those guys with the 10th and 11 picks back-to-back, thinking that I'd get a nice, strong wide receiver core. It hasn't worked out. Looking at my score again, Kevin Smith was having a good day before he had to go out with a kind of quad or knee injury in the third quarter. In that Lion historic victory over the Redskins. Yeah. But the rest of my roster, Snoozeville, totally underperformed. And speaking of underperforming, Gabe's team also had a rough week, with Kurt Warner and Randy Moss being the only position players he had with double-digit fantasy points. If looking at his roster, Darren McFadden and Roddy White have really disappointed so far, and a peek at Gabe's roster reveals little in the way of better options. Hang in there, Gabe. Oh, and by the way, consider changing that avatar. The crazy Raider guy freaks me out. Good call of the week from this game. I'm going to give it to myself for Driver over Hoosh. Hoosh, that choice netted me a 15-point gain, and I made the call despite the fact that I drafted Hoosh like 5 rounds, 6 rounds before I drafted Driver. Hoosh has been terrible. He whined about his Madden rating being only 91 before the season started. Yeah, I think you were lucky to get that, buddy. So definitely not a good fantasy starter, and anyone looking for Hoosh in a trade, call me. Bad call of the week. Well, when your entire team does poorly, it at least cuts down on the second guessing here. Not a lot of bad calls because none of our guys scored well. I guess you got to give this one maybe to Gabe for Brett Favre not starting over Kurt Warner. Starting Favre would have gotten 7 points in that game, but whatever. There really weren't any bad calls this week, but that was because both of our teams sucked, not because we made any real good decisions.